On a freezing winter night, while working her shift at a corner grocery store, a black retail worker noticed a young boy standing outside, alone, scared and barely dressed against the cold. She handed him a brand new coat and a warm meal, hoping no one would make a fuss. But when her manager stormed in, furious at her quiet act of kindness, she was forced to choose between her job and her humanity. What she didn't know was that this moment, this simple choice, was about to change her life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The wind that evening didn't just bite, it roared like a living beast, clawing through the darkened city blocks and slicing between buildings with winter's unrelenting fury. Snow whipped through the night in wild, blinding gusts, clinging to every surface like frost on a grave. Inside the tiny neighborhood grocery store, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly against the gloom, Talia Bennett, 28, stood behind the register, her gloved fingers stiff from the cold seeping through the walls. She'd layered up, but the draft still crept under her sleeves, just like the weight of another long shift beneath fluorescent lights. Her eyes flicked past the window display, its faint glow pooling on the icy sidewalk, when she saw him. A boy, maybe 9 years old, standing just outside the door, pressed against the display rack where holiday tins and discount cookies sat untouched, barely visible in the dim streetlight. He wore a tattered gray hoodie that clung to his thin frame like wet paper. The sleeves barely reached his wrists. His skin was pale beneath its natural brown tone, lips cracked and bluish, and both hands were clutched against his chest, red and raw. But what struck Talia more than his condition was how still he was, like a statue carved in fear. He didn't move toward the shelter of the awning or even glance toward pedestrians. He stood there, rooted, face half turned to the store's warm glow, like he wasn't sure if he belonged in the light. She watched as a man exiting the shop nearly bumped into him without so much as a glance. No one noticed him, no one wanted to. Talia narrowed her eyes, her breath catching as she realized what she was really seeing. This boy wasn't just cold, he was hiding in plain sight. From what, she didn't know, but she knew that kind of fear. Knew what it meant to shrink yourself so others wouldn't feel the need to push you down. She stepped out from behind the counter, ignoring the sharp gust of night wind that sliced through her as she pushed the door open, the bell jingling into the empty dark. Walking slowly, she approached him, careful not to startle him. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, her voice low. "You okay out here?" The boy flinched, his head barely turned. He didn't speak, just gave the smallest shake of his head. Talia took a step closer. Up close, the purple tint of his lips and the trembling in his thin legs were undeniable. She glanced back at the store. No customers right now, just shelves and silence. She remembered the coat, folded neatly in her locker just 30 minutes ago, a clearance deal, last of the rack. She hadn't worn it yet, was saving it for when the real chill hit. Well, it had hit. Just not her. There was a moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, but then she bent down, unzipped her jacket, and shrugged it off. From the bag slung over her shoulder, she pulled out the thick winter coat, still tagged but paid for, still smelling faintly of cardboard and synthetic lining. She knelt in front of him, meeting his eyes. "Put this on," she said firmly, not demanding but not leaving room for refusal either. "Come on now, it's too cold for pride today." The boy looked at her, eyes wide, distrust lingering like frostbite. He didn't move. Talia held the coat open wider. "You don't gotta say anything, just take it." He stared at her like he'd never been offered something without a price before. Then slowly, shakily, he slipped one arm in, then the other. The coat swallowed him whole, but in that moment something softened in his expression, just slightly, but not enough to thaw the fear. Not yet. Not completely. He stepped inside with hesitant feet, the warmth of the grocery store hitting his cheeks like something foreign, something not meant for him. Talia motioned him toward the small space heater tucked near the canned goods aisle. Hardly cozy, but the closest thing they had to comfort. A battered space heater buzzed faintly near the canned goods aisle, its orange coils glowing like dying embers, casting a soft, uneven warmth that barely pushed back the cold. It had been there for years, dented at the base and humming louder each winter, but still no one bothered to replace it. The staff knew how to angle it just right. On nights like this, it was the only thing in the store that felt remotely human. He sat stiffly on the crate she pulled over, his arms still wrapped tightly around himself, the oversized coat swallowing his frame. Talia moved without a word, heading to the back where the staff kept leftover items for break-room meals. She returned with a warm egg sandwich wrapped in brown paper, the kind she usually saved for her own dinner. Kneeling down beside him, she peeled it open, took a bite, then offered it forward with a smile that said, "No pressure." "See?" she murmured, chewing slowly. "It's safe." The boy stared at the sandwich like it might vanish if he blinked too fast. His fingers trembled as he reached for it. He didn't devour it. He tested it, one cautious nibble at a time, as if still expecting her to snatch it away. In his mind, every bite felt like a trick waiting to unravel. He remembered the man's voice, gruff, slurred, promising food if he stayed quiet, only to yank it away when the whiskey took over. Trust wasn't a word Milo knew anymore. It had been carved out of him, replaced with the dull ache of waiting for the next betrayal. But this woman's eyes didn't shift like the man's had. They stayed steady, soft, and that scared him almost as much as the cold. Talia watched him, her chest tightening with something that wasn't quite pity, something deeper. When he finally swallowed and looked up at her, there were tears pooling quietly in his eyes. "You're not going to make me leave, are you?" he whispered, voice so thin it almost didn't exist. "No," Talia said softly, shaking her head. "I just want you to be okay." For a second, the boy, Milo, she would learn later, let himself believe her. His shoulders dropped a fraction, his jaw unclenched, but before the silence could settle, the door at the back of the store creaked open, and heavy boots tapped across the linoleum. It was Mr. Rick. The shift manager's eyes immediately narrowed, his gaze sweeping from the boy to Talia and back. He was tall, rigid, the kind of man who wore his authority like a badge of honor, even when it wasn't needed. The line of his mouth tightened. "What's going on here?" he asked, the question sharp, not curious, accusatory. Talia stood, brushing her palms on her jeans. "It's okay, sir. He was freezing outside. I gave him a coat. It's mine. I paid for it. And the food's from my break stash. I'm not asking the store for anything." Mr. Richter's eyes flared, not with concern but with the thin-lipped disdain of a man who had drawn invisible lines years ago and refused to see past them. "This is not a shelter, Miss Bennet," he said coldly, stepping closer. "And you don't get to invite strays in off the street, no matter how warm-hearted you think you're being. Company policy doesn't bend for emotional charity." Talia's jaw tensed, her voice steady but firm. "He's not a stray, he's a child who could have frozen to death on our doorstep." Mr. Richter scoffed. "And if something had gone missing, who would have been responsible then? You?" His gaze slid back to the boy, lingering too long with a kind of suspicion that made Talia's stomach knot. "You're lucky I'm not calling the cops right now." That was the moment. The moment Milo shrank into himself, hands clutching the coat tighter, eyes darting to the door as if planning an escape. And Talia saw it, the trust she'd worked so gently to earn fracturing beneath the weight of judgment, of fear dressed in authority. And something inside her snapped. Not loud, but sharp, clean, like a line drawn in permanent ink. Talia didn't flinch, not when Mr. Richter's words dripped with disdain, not when the boy beside her pulled further into himself like a shadow trying to disappear. She reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a folded receipt and held it out steadily. "Here," she said, calm but unshaking. "This is the transaction for the coat, and this," she produced another crumpled slip, "is for the sandwich, both paid from my own tips. Yesterday's shift." Mr. Richter barely glanced at the receipts before brushing them aside with a scoff. "It's not about money, Miss Bennet. You abandoned your post. You made executive decisions like this was your store to run, and let's not forget, you turned this place into some kind of charity drop-in." Talia felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but from the sharp sting of injustice. "There were no customers. No rules broken. I helped a child who needed warmth. You call that a problem?" His lips curled in that familiar condescending way. You helped yourself feel noble, and you forgot that you're here to work, not to save the world. This isn't a shelter. You don't get to turn my store into a rescue mission." The word "my" echoed louder than it should have. She saw it in his eyes, the resentment, the subtle undercurrent that had always been there when he spoke to her, even when she did nothing wrong. Especially when she did nothing wrong. She exhaled, voice quieter now. "So, you're firing me for compassion?" He leaned in, satisfied. "I'm letting you go because you can't follow direction. That's all it takes, Miss Bennet. Clean out your locker." She didn't speak again. There was nothing left to say. Her hands were steady as she turned, gently taking the boy's arm. "Come on, baby," she said softly. "Let's go." As they stepped outside, the cold hit harder than before, slicing through fabric and skin, but it was nothing compared to the sting behind her ribs. She didn't let Milo see it, the way her hands shook once they were out of sight, the way her mind raced to the rent due in 5 days, the empty fridge waiting at home. She'd stretched her last paycheck thin, counting coins for that coat, and now the job was gone. Compassion had a cost, and it was heavier than she'd let on. The wind pulled at her coat as she crouched to Milo's level on the sidewalk, her breath coming out in clouds. "Milo," she said, her voice low, warm, "do you know where you want to go? If it's close, I'll take you. If it's far, I've got a couch, some blankets, and heat that mostly works. You can stay tonight, and in the morning, I'll take you wherever you need." Milo didn't answer at first. His eyes searched hers for something, maybe a crack, maybe a lie, but there was only kindness. No pressure, no pity, just space, safe space. She'd wanted to ask more, who he'd run from, where his family was, but his trembling hands and the way his gaze darted to every shadow stopped her. Not now, she thought, not when he's still half trapped in whatever hell he'd climbed out of. She'd get answers later, when his breathing steadied. His voice came out like air squeezed through a bruise. "I want to go home, but it's really far." Talia nodded, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair behind her ear. "Then we'll wait. It's too cold to walk anywhere tonight. Morning's better anyway. You're safe with me, I promise." And for the first time the boy nodded back, not because he believed her completely, but because somehow he wanted to. She held his hand gently as they walked, the city lights dimming behind them like fading stars. The snow had slowed, but the air still carried that biting sharpness that crept beneath skin and stayed in the bones. Talia glanced down at him, his small fingers gripping hers tighter than she expected. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked softly. "Milo," he murmured, eyes fixed ahead. "And where's home, Milo?" "Far," he said after a pause, voice barely audible. I got out last night. Through a window." Talia's heart skipped. The way he said it, like freedom tasted like cold air and bruised knuckles, made her throat tighten. "Then you did something brave," she said, "and brave people deserve rest." He didn't reply. He didn't have to. They reached her apartment building 15 minutes later, a crumbling walk-up with a flickering hallway light and a lock that needed just the right jiggle. Inside, the warmth was modest, the kind that came from a struggling radiator and layers of thrifted rugs. Her space was small, worn, and filled with the quiet tension of unpaid bills stacked on the counter. But it was hers, and tonight it was theirs. She pulled out her only spare blanket, thick and old but clean, and draped it over the couch. "You can sleep here," she said, kneeling to his eye level again. "It's not much, but the cushions are soft and the window stays shut." Milo didn't speak. He just looked around like he wasn't sure what to do with comfort. Talia pulled the last sandwich from the fridge, wrapped in wax paper, half of what she'd planned for lunch tomorrow, and broke it in two. She handed him one half, kept the other. "I bought that coat on sale," she said suddenly, as if needing to justify herself to someone, maybe to herself. "Was going to save it for when it got worse out, but I think today was worse enough." Milo took a bite without looking up. The way he held the food said everything, like he expected it to vanish if he blinked. After he finished, she offered him socks, a glass of water, her silence. When the lights dimmed and the apartment fell quiet, Milo lay on his side, wrapped in the coat like armor. But he didn't fall asleep easily. He flinched at every creak, every hung of the heater, every distant honk from outside. Talia stayed on the nearby armchair, not saying much, but not leaving either. Once, around 2 in the morning, he shot upright, breathing hard, eyes wide with the panic of someone still half trapped in another place. His chest heaved as shadows from that room clawed at him again, the mildew-stained walls, the flicker of the TV casting ghosts on the ceiling, the weight of a lock clicking shut. He dreamed of the window, of his fingernails scraping against the frame as he pushed, of the moment he thought he'd be caught. Freedom hadn't felt real then, and it didn't now. Just a fragile thing that could shatter with a single loud noise. "You're safe," she whispered from across the room, her voice like a lullaby. "You're safe here, Milo. I'm right here." It took a while, but eventually he lay back down. Not because the world was okay again, but because in this tiny corner of it someone had made space for him to breathe. The air at dawn was sharp, but gentler than the night before. It held a fragile stillness, the kind that follows a storm's retreat, when the world seems to catch its breath. Talia pedaled slowly through the neighborhood streets, the first gray light creeping over rooftops. Milo bundled tight behind her on the old bicycle seat, his arms looped gently around her waist, his breath fogging in the cold. The city looked softer in the early light, like it hadn't yet remembered how to be harsh. As they rode, Milo spoke in fragments, his voice quiet but steadier than the night before. His voice cracked as he spoke of the room, oil and mildew thick in the air, a smell that clung to his skin even now. The man who took him would slump over, TV buzzing static, whiskey bottles rolling across the floor like fallen soldiers. Milo's eyes flickered, lost in the memory. "He'd yell till his voice gave out," he whispered, "said I'd never leave. But last night, when he started snoring, I couldn't wait any more. The crate wobbled under me, and I thought the window'd break before I got out. Kept thinking he'd wake up, kept hearing his boots behind me even when I hit the snow." He'd stumbled through the dark, legs numb from the cold, until a delivery truck slowed near an alley a few blocks away. The driver, half asleep himself, tossed him a spare blanket from the cab and drove off, never asking questions. It wasn't enough to keep him warm, but it got him close enough to collapse near the store's dim glow. Talia listened, her jaw tight, eyes focused on the road ahead, her grip on the handlebars white-knuckled. When they turned onto the long paved drive of a gated property lined with trimmed hedges and tall, whispering trees, Talia's feet stilled, the mansion loomed before them, grand, silent, wrapped in early morning fog and manicured perfection. When they turned onto the long paved drive of a gated property lined with trimmed hedges and tall, whispering trees, Talia's feet stilled. The mansion loomed before them, grand, silent, wrapped in early morning fog and manicured perfection. Milo had stayed quiet about the search efforts, but later she'd learned the truth. The storm had grounded their helicopters, blanketed their search dogs' tracks, and turned every road into a maze of white. He'd kept to the shadows, too scared of being dragged back to step into the open where their lights might have found him. She stared up at it, then at Milo, heart pounding. "This is your home?" Milo nodded slowly. "Yeah." Before she could say anything more, a figure in a security uniform stepped from the front gatehouse, his face still groggy with sleep. His eyes locked on Milo, and everything about him changed in an instant. He stepped forward fast, voice catching. "Is that called Chu, Milo? Is that really you?" Milo stood tall, or tried to. He didn't speak, but he gave the man a single, solemn nod. The guard's hand flew to his radio. "We found him," he said breathlessly. "He's here. He's home." The front door burst open moments later. A man and woman raced across the stone steps in slippers and robes, their faces pale with disbelief. The woman's cry pierced the air as she dropped to her knees and gathered Milo into her arms, sobbing into his shoulder. The man, taller, broad-shouldered, eyes red, wrapped both of them up, shaking with relief. Talia stood at a distance, breath frozen, hands at her sides. She watched as their world stitched itself back together, thread by fragile thread, right there in front of her. No one noticed her right away. She didn't mind. Some moments didn't need witnesses. They just needed to happen. And this one was meant to. Then Milo turned, eyes finding her across the driveway. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just looked at her, with gratitude, with trust, with something soft and unspoken, and it was enough. It was everything. Talia hadn't waited for applause. As soon as she was sure Milo was safe, wrapped in the arms of the people who loved him, surrounded by warmth and wealth and all the things a child should never have been without, she quietly stepped back, turned around, and walked away. No one saw her leave. She didn't need them to. The world didn't need to know her name. She had done what her heart told her was right, and for her, that was enough. But the world noticed anyway. 3 days later, her phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. A link, a headline. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the words. "Helped Milo? The Whitmore family wants to find you." There was a photo of Milo, smiling this time, and a statement from his father asking for the woman who'd brought his son home to come forward. Talia stared at it, uncertain, her thumb hovering over the screen. She didn't want money. She didn't want recognition. But a part of her wanted Milo to know she hadn't just disappeared. So she reached out. 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her building. It looked comically out of place against the peeling paint and crooked steps. When she opened the door, a man stepped out, tall, poised, but with eyes that still carried the kind of exhaustion only fear for your child can carve into a person. It was Milo's father. "Miss Bennet?" he asked. Talia nodded, her throat dry. He held out an envelope, his voice steady but tired. "You brought my son back when we'd lost hope. I don't know how to repay that, but this is a start." She eyed the envelope warily, hands still at her sides. "I didn't do it for money." "I know," he said, softer now, "but you shouldn't have to choose between kindness and surviving. Take it, please." Inside was a check, $20,000. Not a fortune, but enough to breathe. Her knees still wobbled, not from the amount, but from the weight of being seen. She didn't cry then, but she would later. 1 year later, the bell above the cafe door chimed as customers slipped in from the evening chill, their shadows stretching long under the streetlights. The warm corner sat on the edge of the city, nestled between an outreach center and a used bookstore, its windows glowing softly against the night, its paint still peeling from months of delays. The check, $20,000, had gotten her through the deposit and a rickety espresso machine, but the rest was a grind. Late nights scrubbing floors, bartering with suppliers for dented cans, fighting a landlord who hiked the rent when he smelled opportunity. A local non-profit stepped in after a Whitmore family friend whispered her name, offering donated tables, a few volunteers, but the lights flickered some nights and the heat still groaned. She made it work, barely. They handled the permits, the donations, the little things Talia couldn't stretch $100,000 to cover. She didn't mind. It wasn't about her name on the sign, it was about the warmth inside. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of warmth, of music, of laughter. People came here for more than coffee, they came for care. Behind the counter, Talia poured 2 cups, her movements easy, confident. A child at one of the tables giggled as a volunteer handed her a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Another man in a worn coat wrapped cold fingers around a bowl of soup, offered with no questions asked. On the wall behind them, a painting hung proudly. A boy in a bright red coat, arms stretched wide in the snow, a smile like sunrise on his face. Below it, in Milo's careful handwriting, were the words, "To Miss Talia, thank you for not walking past me." And beneath that, etched in paint just slightly faded from the sun, "In the coldest days, even one warm heart can light a whole winter." Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.